So in my most recent Oscar Top 10 video, I discussed my favorite acting Oscar nominations for performances in the horror genre. As I've said many times on this channel before, this is my favorite movie genre, and so it always fills me with joy when a great performance in a horror film gets into the Academy Awards. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, I celebrate. However, let's be honest, there have been so many astonishing performances in the horror genre that were snubbed by the Academy. What do I think are the top 10 most egregious acting Oscar snubs in horror films? Here we go. Number 10, Boris Karloff, The Bride of Frankenstein.
Alone. Bad. Friend. Good. Friend. Good.
So many of my favorite films of all time are those Universal monster movies of the 1930s and 1940s. These movies, after so many decades, are still loads of fun. I love the black and white cinematography, the atmosphere, the short running times. Many of these films have terrific performances: Bela Lugosi in Dracula, Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman. But of all the Universal monster movies, there is one performance I do think was Oscar worthy. I don't think Boris Karloff has quite enough to do in 1931's Frankenstein to make him an Oscar nominee, but I think Karloff is an emotionally devastating revelation in 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein. This is my favorite Universal monster movie, James Whale's masterpiece. From beginning to end, it always seems fresh, and Karloff at the center of this movie as Frankenstein's monster is so riveting. He gets to talk in the sequel. He doesn't really do much in the first one other than some grunts. He actually forms words in The Bride of Frankenstein that allows his character to grow and evolve. His long scene with the blind man is one of the great movie scenes of all time, honestly. And I feel like in this movie, Karloff gets one iconic moment after another, and I feel like he lets nothing go to waste. This is a brilliant performance from an amazing actor who never really got his due. I do think The Bride of Frankenstein is his finest hour, and there was room for him in Best Actor of 1935. That's the year that Mutiny on the Bounty gets 3 Oscar nominations in Best Actor. The person I would replace him with, however, is Paul Muni for Black Fury. That was a write-in nomination for a performance that really hasn't had any lasting legacy. I would take out Muni and put in Boris Karloff for The Bride of Frankenstein. Number 9, Lupita Nyong'o, Us.
The girl had her first child, a beautiful baby girl, but the shadow, she gave birth to a little monster.
So this was easily one of my favorite performances of 2019. That film came out earlier in the year. It was Jordan Peele's much anticipated follow-up to Get Out, which was a big Oscar player, as I talked about in the last top 10 video. Us is a different kind of movie than Get Out. I mean, it's more supernatural. It goes to some really weird places in the second half. I knew walking out of Us in early 2019, it was not going to get into the Oscars for Best Picture, but I still thought the film could get into Best Original Screenplay, and for sure, Lupita Nyong'o for Best Actress. Nyong'o, who won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, has still to date not received a second Academy Award nomination. I do think she was worthy for her spectacular dual performance in Us. This is a transformative performance in every way. The good side of this woman and the evil side of this woman sharing some really captivating scenes in this movie, often together. Nyong'o had to change her voice, the way she moves, that terrifying look in her eye. Like, this is an amazing movie performance. I don't care the genre. The fact that she was completely ignored that whole award season does not sit well with me. She should have gotten in. This might be controversial to some because I just made her Elusive Oscar video, but for 2019, the performance I would take out is Saoirse Ronan in Little Women, and I would replace her with Lupita Nyong'o in Us. Number 8, Joan Crawford, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Just that nosy Mrs. Bates going on about your picture last night.
Oh, really? Did she like it? Oh, really? Did she like it?
Now think about all the tension and turmoil that took place when Bette Davis got a Best Actress Oscar nomination for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and Joan Crawford missed. Like, the amazing FX series Feud, Betty and Joan went into this a little bit. Joan Crawford was not happy being snubbed for her really terrific performance in that film. And so she kind of went behind Bette Davis's back and reached out to every other Best Actress nominee and said, hey, if you can't make it, I will accept the trophy for you. Just imagine what would have happened if Joan Crawford had also made the Best Actress Final Five. Like if she made it in too, like what kind of story would have happened there? If Crawford had been nominated, I don't think she would have accepted Anne Bancroft's Oscar for The Miracle Worker. I think she just would have gone to the ceremony as a nominee. But I don't know, I still feel like there would have been some shenanigans behind the scenes. Whatever might have happened, I do think Joan Crawford's performance in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is Oscar-worthy. It's not as showy as Bette Davis in that film, I will grant you that, but like I'm going to talk about with my number 7 choice, sometimes I think we spend too much time focused on the showiest performance in a movie. I think Crawford in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane gives one of her very best performances. It's so grounded, it's so sad, she's trying everything she can to connect with her sister, and nothing ever works. It is a tragic character, beautifully brought to life by Crawford. And you know what? I'm going to do the unthinkable here. I know many of you are going to be mad at me about this, but I'm going to take out Katharine Hepburn in Long Day's Journey into Night and replace her with Joan Crawford in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Number 7, James Caan, Misery.
Remember how for all those years nobody knew who Misery's real father was? Or if they'd ever be reunited? It's all right here.
So again, the showier, bigger performance gets the accolades, gets the Oscar win, Kathy Bates in Misery, and James Caan is completely ignored. When it came to the early 1991 award season, it was like James Caan didn't even exist. Like that performance meant nothing. And as much as I love, with a big fat capital L, Kathy Bates' performance in Misery, I don't think that movie works at all without James Caan's brilliant performance. I heard stories about how Caan was very frustrated having to perform in a movie where he's basically in a bed for the entirety of the running time, and that frustration he felt really works in that character. The way he knows if he fights back too early, she might really take him out, the little things he tries to do to outwit Annie Wilkes, and none of them seem to work. Like, it's crazy to me that James Caan only received one Oscar nomination in his long career, Best Supporting Actor for The Godfather. I mean, I guess if you're going to have one, that is an all-timer, but he was such a gifted actor, a talented performer, and I do think he deserved a Best Actor Oscar nomination for Misery. I would take out Richard Harris for The Field and replace him with James Caan in Misery. Number 6, Mia Farrow, Rosemary's Baby.
Soon after that, in August 1886, his son Stephen was born. 1886, got it? That makes him 79 now.
This performance definitely gets to be on the list because I do think this is a turn in a classic film that many people assume got an Oscar nomination. I mean, just a few days ago on YouTube, on one of my previous videos, somebody commented about how they love that Mia Farrow Oscar nomination for Rosemary's Baby, and I was like, wait, she didn't get in, right? And I had to go double check. What's really weird about the whole thing is that Ruth Gordon wins the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for Rosemary's Baby, but Mia Farrow doesn't even get the nomination. And to this day, Mia Farrow has never received an Academy Award nod. I think she should have been nominated for The Purple Rose of Cairo in the mid-1980s, and the other film she should have gotten an Oscar nomination for is obviously Rosemary's Baby. Like, how iconic is that character and performance? Images in that movie live in all our minds rent-free. I mean, I feel like her acting in the final scene should have gotten her an Oscar nod. And all throughout that movie, her sense of anticipation, her fear, the dread, all those different directions the screenplay takes, and Mia Farrow is on board for anything. This is a crazy good performance in the history of the horror genre that should have been recognized by the Academy. I would take out Vanessa Redgrave for Isadora and replace her with Mia Farrow for Rosemary's Baby. Number 5, Jack Nicholson, The Shining.
I wouldn't touch one hair on his goddamn little head. I love the little son of a bitch.
Alright, so I know Jack Nicholson has a ton of Oscar nominations, but I do think the one classic, amazing Nicholson performance that got completely swept under the rug come awards time, but should have been nominated, is his legendary portrayal of Jack Torrance in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. We are just days away from my Oscar fiasco video about this movie. Like, how did this all-timer genre movie classic get nothing at the Oscars and instead get 2 Razzie Award nominations? I know we appreciate this film more today than many people did in 1980, critics, audiences. I mean, I guess people just needed a few years to recognize how great this film is, but still, it's weird. It's so gripping, so haunting. I know some people think Jack Nicholson goes off the rails very quickly, but I've never felt that way about Nicholson in that movie. I think he is very charming, very likable in those early scenes. I think the arc of Jack Torrance is a little bit more nuanced in the book by Stephen King, I will give you that. But I think there's something to be said by how famous this Jack Nicholson performance is. We all know his many classic lines in this movie, his mannerisms, the psychotic, crazy person he turns into in that last half hour. Like, this role was perfect for Jack Nicholson, and I still to this day think he hits it out of the park. He absolutely should have gotten into the Oscars for Best Actor. I would take out Jack Lemmon in Tribute and replace him with Jack Nicholson in The Shining. Number 4, Dee Wallace, Cujo. So here's another Stephen King adaptation, and a movie that, let's be honest, probably was never going to get into the Oscars. I mean, it's a very scary movie about a giant, rabid Saint Bernard who goes after a woman and her son in a little car in the middle of nowhere, and this is before cell phones. They can't call anybody. There's nobody around. What are they to do? Cujo is such a clever concept. I love the book and the movie. I think Dee Wallace gives an extraordinary performance in this film. She has always been an underrated actress in my mind, and she's given so many wonderful performances in the horror genre. The Howling is another favorite from that time, but I think Cujo is her best performance on film. I mean, for what, almost an hour, maybe longer? She is stuck in a tiny vehicle, terrified for her own safety, the safety of her son, the physically draining sense of panic and dread. Like, Dee Wallace is bringing it in this movie. Cujo would not work with a lesser actress not giving 110%. Dee Wallace should be an Oscar-nominated actress, and I think her Academy Award nod should be for Cujo. I would take out Jane Alexander for Testament and replace her with Dee Wallace for Cujo. Number 3, Anthony Perkins, Psycho.
Well, it was raining, and her hair was all wet. I tell you, it's not really a very good picture, either.
No, I guess not.
To be honest, I toyed with making this the number 1 choice. Anthony Perkins in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho should definitely be an Oscar-nominated performance. What makes it even more painful is that Janet Leigh got into Best Supporting Actress, and Alfred Hitchcock was nominated for Best Director. So the Academy clearly responded to the film, and it's like, well, wait a second here. You're going to nominate Janet Leigh and Alfred Hitchcock and then ignore Anthony Perkins? Norman Bates is the person this film is ultimately about. It's his story. He's so creepy and menacing and just kind of off right from the start. He's likable enough that when we get to the scene where he's waiting for the car to go under the water, we know Marion Crane's dead body is in the trunk. When the car stops and doesn't submerge all the way down, we get nervous. We get scared for Norman Bates. Suddenly, we are on his side, even though we've spent the first 40 minutes of the movie with another character. Like, I've always found Anthony Perkins a fascinating actor. I've adored him in many other movies, but Norman Bates in Psycho is his all-timer role. He had been Oscar nominated a few years prior for a film called Friendly Persuasion, and he was a big star by 1960, so it makes sense to me that the Academy would have recognized him. I guess you could argue they didn't know whether to put him into Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor. I mean, he's not really in the first act of the movie, so there's that. I always wonder if Anthony Perkins got close, but there was that category confusion, and so he ended up missing both. I have always thought Psycho is Norman Bates' story, and so I would consider him Best Actor. And so in that category at the Oscars in early 1961, I would take out Laurence Olivier for The Entertainer and replace him with Anthony Perkins in Psycho. Number 2, Toni Collette, Hereditary.
I was standing there with a box of matches and an empty can of paint thinner. And I woke myself up striking the match, which also woke Peter up, and he started to scream.
Very few film performances in any genre have wowed me as much as Toni Collette in Ari Aster's masterpiece Hereditary, my favorite film of 2018. Like, it's such a beautiful, terrifying, wild ride of a movie. All the actors in it are great. I think Alex Wolff was worthy of a Best Supporting Actor nomination. Like, his performance, I don't feel is talked about enough. He is dazzling in that film too. But Toni Collette is on another level. I don't care what genre this movie is. I don't care how grisly, how horrifying, how unsettling this movie sometimes can be. This is a film performance for the ages from an actor who's always good. I've always enjoyed Toni Collette throughout the decades, but oh my god, did she step up to the plate for Hereditary. The dinner scene when she goes off on her son is of course her most remembered moment in the film, but there are so many others. Her grieving her mother, her grieving her daughter, those horrifying nightmares she has. Like, you should all be happy I didn't have a YouTube channel in 2018, 2019, because I would have been obnoxious. I would have been saying for weeks and months, Toni Collette deserves to get an Oscar nomination for Hereditary. Now, here's the deal. The Best Actress Oscar lineup of 2018 is stacked. Is a great one. I think I would be more upset about the Toni Collette omission today if there were like one or two bad performances here. Still, I think Toni Collette gave the best performance of 2018, and she should have made the Best Actress Final 5 regardless. 19 years following her Best Supporting Actress nomination for The Sixth Sense, it was time to give this incredible performer at the height of her powers a Best Actress Oscar nomination, and it should have been for Hereditary. If I absolutely had to make the choice, I would take out Melissa McCarthy for Can You Ever Forgive Me and replace her with Toni Collette in Hereditary. Alright, before I get to my number one choice, a few runners up. Essie Davis in The Babadook. This movie was such a find. I kept hearing about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I finally checked it out on Blu-ray, and wow, like, this movie floored me. And that Essie Davis performance is wonderful. I don't know if enough people saw the film to really get her into the awards conversation, but Essie Davis in Best Actress, that would have been awesome. Drew Barrymore, Scream. I know I get some looks about this one. I talked about this previously in my Acting Oscar Snubs video of the 1990s. She's only in the opening few minutes of Wes Craven's film, but how iconic in the history of the horror genre, especially of the last 30 years, is that performance. Her terror is so real, the emotion on her face, the screaming, the crying, everything Drew Barrymore does in those opening minutes of Scream, I will never forget. Bruce Willis, The Sixth Sense, I think his performance in this film is flawless, and I do think since this film got into Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Supporting Actress, this was the closest Bruce Willis ever came to an Academy Award nomination. I think it would have been a well-deserved one. Marcia Gay Harden, The Mist, one of my favorite villainous performances in the movies of the last 20 years. I do believe it's only one of two times a character was killed in a movie when I jumped up out of my chair and cheered. The other time was Emma Roberts in Scream 4, but Marcia Gay Harden in The Mist, like, this was the period of time where she was getting some Oscar nominations. She won for Pollock. I love Marcia Gay Harden's physical and emotional transformation throughout The Mist, which I feel is an underrated genre movie, and Elizabeth Moss, The Invisible Man. We've come a long way from the Universal monster movies of the 1930s all the way to 2020's kind of Universal monster movie. This was my favorite film of 2020. I loved every second of it. It's so compelling, and at the heart of it is that amazing performance by Elizabeth Moss. She is so impressive in this movie. It's an emotionally draining character, what she has to go through. That catharsis at the end of the film is spectacular. I love that film. I love that performance. I do think Elizabeth Moss also deserved to be Oscar nominated in the Best Actress category. And now that takes me to my number one choice. What do I think is the most egregious acting Oscar snub in the horror genre? This is one of my all-time favorite movie performances in a film that always makes me cry at the end. It's a lead performance in a genre film that 100% should have gotten an Oscar nomination. The Academy proved that in this same year, they could nominate Sigourney Weaver for Aliens, Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. My number one choice is Jeff Goldblum in The Fly.
I'm saying I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it. But now the dream is over. And the insect is awake.
This movie has such a power to it. A compelling story, a great sense of place and pacing, innovative and creative direction from David Cronenberg, and a transformative, richly textured performance from Jeff Goldblum as Seth Brundle, kind of like the first movie we talked about, Bride of Frankenstein, where people are trying to play God. Seth Brundle is also playing God in The Fly, a man who thinks he's a genius and is about to change the world with one of his new inventions. But wouldn't you know it, something goes horribly wrong, and he very slowly begins to transform into a human-sized fly. The story is very silly in the 1950s version, but it's not silly at all in David Cronenberg's 80s remake. Everything is taken dead seriously, and as Seth begins to realize what's happening to him, the ego this character has leaves very quickly, and the relationship he has with Veronica, played by Geena Davis, will never be the same. Jeff Goldblum and Geena Davis were a real romantic couple at the time, and their chemistry in the movie packs a wallop. It's great. You really feel for her. It's so devastating as she watches this man she loves disintegrate into an insect before her eyes. The Fly at times is a grisly horror film, especially at the end, but it's also a beautiful love story that brings tears to your eyes. And Jeff Goldblum in this movie, oh my god. To me, The Fly shows everything Jeff Goldblum is capable of as a dramatic actor. Even in the third act, when you can't really see Goldblum anymore, he's behind pounds and pounds of makeup and prosthetics. His eyes, his voice, his soul comes through the screen. Everything works in this movie. I can't wait to watch it again, especially for that remarkable all-timer performance by Jeff Goldblum. There was room for him to get into the Best Actor category at the Oscars that year. William Hurt had just won his Oscar for Kiss of the Spider-Woman a year before, and a year later he would be nominated for Broadcast News, so I would say we can take out his nomination for Children of a Lesser God and replace him with Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you think are the most egregious acting Oscar snubs in the horror genre. Do you agree with my picks? And is there anyone you think I left off the list? We'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.